recording. So everybody knows if that is a problem, I do apologize. We like to capture everything that we do here. So that we can share all of the good stuff that I know is going to come about. I'm very excited about this, and I'm not going to go any further because I could just talk for hours about the excitement I have for this event. What I'd like everybody to do to start, though, if you're on a computer, it's easier. You can look down at the bottom of your Zoom screen and you can see where the chat is. I think I have that's already 6 people. But if you can open up your chat, some people have already started to put in either where they're from or who they're representing today. And if you would just do that for me. We got folks from Jacksonville, Newport Richey, Warrior Wellness Program, more Jacksonville. Imagine that, for change, headquarters is in Jacksonville, Port Charlotte, South Florida, Wilton Manors, Jacksonville, Tampa. Another Warrior Wellness out of Holiday, Florida, which is real close to Newport Richey. And so we've got people from basically pretty much all over the state of Florida, which is very, very amazing. What I want you to do is just, try to let your thinking mind rest, let your thoughts rest, and feel what it feels like to be a part of something where you have folks that are all over the state of Florida. There may be no feeling, or there may be a lot. And those of you that just come in, welcome. All I'm asking you to do is type into the chat where you're from, and then how that makes you feel. Awesome. All right. So now the next step. Now, here's the thing. Before I go on to the next little phase, I do want to talk about the chat. During the discussion, I'll ask everybody except the folks that are on the panel to go onto mute. That's just so that we can get through this topic. Also, I'm not discouraging you to not put anything in the chat or put anything in the chat, excuse me. I just know that as dense as this topic is, trying to manage that and this may be a problem. I do have an assistant that I could do it. And so if I don't address yours, please don't be sad. I may get to it. It just depends upon where we're at. That being said, though, just because it works for me, I know it's not the truth, and I also know it may not work for you. All I ask is you just try to be open to what is being discussed today. And then I am also going to ask you to feel into what we're discussing. That will happen. And you'll see as we get along with that. All right. Next step. Close your chat down, please. And then go into a gallery view. If you're able to, I would like for you to turn your video on. And then as everyone starts to turn their videos on, what I want you to do is feel what it looks like to see all of these beautiful faces. Oh, this is hard. I'm going to ask you not to, just like my youth, I hate to say boys because they're young men that I teach. It's easier to listen to your body when you're not moving or speaking. So try to sit here and feel what your eyes see. That's what I'm trying to say. feel your eyes seeing all these beautiful faces that are on here, knowing they're coming from basically the entire state of Florida. Oops, I put a thank you money in there. I wanted you just to thank or feel, excuse me. All right. Now, unfortunately, what I'm going to ask everybody except the panel members to do is to turn off of your video and to go on mute. Thank you for coming into that little exercise with me. And so now I think if you can help me out, Leah, and I forgot to do that, was to pin all of the panel participants. So if you're not a panel participant, I ask that you place yourself or turn your camera off, please. And then we should be able to pin everybody. Give us a second here. That we need to, so
Can you see all four of you, Forrest?
say again one more time, please.
Can you see all four of you now?
I pinned everybody myself.
Yeah, and I pinned everyone too.
So I think, okay, perfect. Thank you, Brianna. All right, good.
Okay.
Cool. Awesome. All right. Now, the way this is gonna just give everybody a heads up. I'm gonna start with this. We're gonna go to Charity, then Chris, then Brad. The way this was going to work, we're going to each of us will get 3 minutes to introduce ourselves and give a elevator pitch on the value of vulnerability. In between each person, I'm going to ask you to feel what their elevator pitch feels like. Don't think about it. I know that's weird, but try. And then after that, there's going to be a few things to unpack from their pitches, and we will get to that the best we can. And by the way, I have not heard any of their pitches, nor have they heard mine. I think Charity and I may have discussed a few little things about the funniness of vulnerability. And the example is we did it a little bit before some of you got on when we were razzing the Marines and how they're prey on eaters. Which the thing, what's awesome about it is that if I can accept that and let that happen, that's where the good part of vulnerability. But I'm not going to get into that. Sorry, I opened up a rabbit hole and I didn't want to get there. Sorry. All right, so I'll start. My name is Forrest Spall. For those of you that don't know me, I am a lead teacher for Tampa chapter West Side of Tampa chapter Yoga for Change, and I'm an adaptive yoga teacher. I take great pride in I will adapt yoga to your uniqueness. I have folks that train to be like athletes, all the way to folks that have some sort of disability. I hate to say it like that, but or a disadvantage. I think one of there's someone who's told me about that word that actually fits and fits more effectively. And so that being said, though, that's a little bit about who I am. What I think the value of vulnerability is, I know for me, when I practice healthy vulnerability, living life with a disability is not as heavy. I'll say it one more time. When I practice healthy vulnerability, living life with a disability is not as heavy. So now what I want everyone to do for the next 30 seconds or so is feel what that statement feels like. When I practice healthy vulnerability, living life with a disability is not as heavy. All right. Perfect. Thank you, everyone. Now, this next person, I'm gonna say she has been involved with every single one of these I've done. This is the third one I've done. I did one for teacher training. I did one in appreciation for Veterans Day month, which is November, and then this one here is Military Appreciation Month. And we're also gonna be doing another one in November, which guess what? I'm stepping away, not stepping away, but Charity's gonna be facilitating that. So I'm looking forward to being one without my camera on right now for that one in November. Anyhow, I hand it over to Charity.
Thanks, Forrest. So my name is Charity, and I'm retired from the Navy. I retired in 2018, and I'm now a Yoga for Change teacher. I'm a grief movement guide, and I truly try to do the best I can to be a vulnerable and loving human being. Some days it's easier than others. Keeping that in mind, like today, I find myself shaking, my hands sweating, and that fear of being vulnerable is real. It's real today. I also know how connecting it can be to open it up. So when I was in the Navy, a lot of the bosses that I heard so many times, oh, you're too emotional. You're too compassionate, you're too this, you're too that. And so it led me to harden on the outside. I thought that was what I was supposed to do. I thought something was wrong with me. And so I hardened, and that I'm still dealing with pain from that. And the irony of all of that was the hardening wasn't enough. I just kept hearing those comments. However, when they needed something to be said to all of the sailors, when they needed some kind of word to be passed that was emotional and hard and triggering, guess who they came to? Me. So there's something about that connection. It's hysterical, and it's eye-opening at the same time that there is a value in vulnerability because it connects. It connects people. And to me, it's like breath. It's necessary for me to live a complete life and to be me, to be vulnerable. And very few things connect us in this life, but grief, pain, aging, those things disconnect us. And vulnerability is what brings us back to each other. So, learning to laugh at myself and live in the messiness, and then have others to do that with, brings that sense of community and connection that we're not perfect and we're not meant to be. And it's pretty hysterical sometimes of things that happen. But if we don't share that with each other, we just stay disconnected in our own little pods. So for me, vulnerability creates connection. And I share about it so much. And I'm glad that we're talking about this as veterans. This is where it really hits me. But I don't apologize anymore. I share it with veterans because you hear all the time that veterans commit suicide, and the reasons why are because they feel alone, they feel disconnected, they feel pain, they don't feel heard, they don't feel seen. And what's the one thing that can alleviate all of that is being vulnerable and connecting with that person. So not only is vulnerability a connection, and to me it's like breath, I truly believe that it can save lives. So thanks.
Thank you, Charity. So what I want everybody to do is feel what it feels like to have vulnerability as a connection. No wrong way to feel. You may feel that connection as Charity is feeling it, or you may feel the opposite here, and that's okay. Vulnerability is connection. All right, thank you, Charity. That was very, very, very awesome. And I am so grateful that you brought that to us today. So with that, this next person, every single experience I've had with him, he has probably been one of the most kindest and compassionate person I know, even with dealing with someone like me. So I will not say any more, and I will give it over to Chris.
All right, hello everyone. My name is Chris Soul. I'm the Director of Operations at Warrior Wellness Program. I'm a retired Army veteran, and I currently work in the social work field. It's because of my own journey with trauma and transition that I found a place here to help other veterans who are facing those same struggles. I'm grateful for this opportunity. When Forrest asked me to do this, like my first reaction was like, absolutely not. Because I don't mind being vulnerable in intimate situations, but when you put me in front of a camera and a bunch of other people, I get real nervous with that, like I'm not comfortable doing that. So I thought a lot about the vulnerability and how it has value in my life. And when I did a little bit of research on it, and vulnerable is defined as susceptible to physical harm or susceptible to emotional injury, right? And we spend most of our time in this non-conscious vulnerability at risk of the dangers of daily life, right? Like we're driving down the road, we're not thinking about being vulnerable to the other people in cars or any of that stuff. So we don't always recognize or think of all those risks, but we are being vulnerable in that situation, because we are so used to operating in that environment. Like, well, we can also choose like the conscious vulnerability, right? Like where we choose to face something or be vulnerable in a situation that it's not always comfortable. Which I believe is an asset. Choosing to be vulnerable is an asset. Choosing to be vulnerable in certain situations can be a catalyst to healing and growth. For me, it was, that means that I open myself up to opportunities to heal by being honest about the stuff that is hard to talk about, and being intimate with others about past experiences and current struggles, right? Like for me, all those things require courage and vulnerability. And it wasn't until I found the courage to face the things causing pain in my life that I was able to overcome them. When I think of trauma of any kind, such as like combat trauma, moral injury, or sexual trauma, and many others, right? I believe that we must take a risk at being vulnerable to seek help and be honest about what happened in the past to take away its power to impact the future. I carried a ton of guilt and shame for the things I did in combat that were out of my control. But I chose to stuff all that pain instead of facing it. And, that eventually led to addiction and destruction of everything I loved. When I eventually had enough of the pain and became like vulnerable, I was able to be honest with myself. Vulnerability is hard. Living my life in emotional pain and chaos was hard. And it really came down to choosing my heart, right? And facing the things that I needed to face. Thanks.
Thank you, Chris, very much. So what I want you all to feel with this, and he had a whole lot to say there, and I really appreciate it. But what I got out of that was vulnerability is the ability to face that which life is presenting me. Whatever, and there's that little subtle hard right versus easy wrong that we all in the military were taught, I think. But then they said open up too. So what I'm going to say here is what does that make you feel? How do you feel that in your body? All right, awesome. Thank you, Chris. All right. Last and definitely not least, I'm very honored here to introduce, and I'm not really introducing, I'm just kind of handing it over to the next person that I've known for quite some time. I respect everything he brings to the table with what we do in our trauma work, within that work of trauma. And I can't really say any more, otherwise I would probably take up the rest of the time. So I give you now, Brad.
Yeah, thank you, Forrest. Can you hear me okay? Good. Yeah, so Forrest and I have known each other probably 35, 40 years, and it's an honor to be here. I appreciate you inviting me for sure. My name's Bradley Hall, and I'm a Navy veteran and a retired firefighter, and I've been coaching for about 30 years and began recovering from my own trauma about almost 20 years ago. And that trauma includes childhood sexual abuse, family mental health issues, and intergenerational trauma, as well as some self-inflicted trauma in my late teens and early 20s that I'm sure many people here can speak to as well. And of course, a few traumatic experiences while serving on the fire department. And when I finally began to awaken in my early 30s, coincidentally at that same time, not coincidentally, it was actually because of my awakening, I decided to go back to school and earn my master's degree in depth psychology, which focuses on the unconscious mind. So my statement here is probably going to be, it's going to be pretty rooted in that discipline. And today I work with trauma survivors as a trauma recovery coach. And I'm currently actually beginning to work on a program specifically for first responders. But when it comes to vulnerability, I gave this a lot of thought, and everyone had such great answers. And I was afraid that what I came up with would repeat some what everyone else said, but everyone gave a different answer, and it was just so beautiful to hear everyone's testimony. And for me, I like to focus. Fear and anxiety often present as anger and aggression, and those emotions inhibit our ability to connect with our vulnerability and the ability to connect with our deeper emotions. And that itself leads to repression of the emotions and the associated memories that come with it. And they don't go away. And I'm sure everyone here knows exactly what I'm talking about. I mean, they're buried, and then they can multiply and they can fester. And oftentimes they're bubbling in the unconscious, just under the surface of our consciousness, ready to erupt, and at times can have a dramatic unwanted effect unexpectedly, not only on our behavior, but ultimately, our mental and physical health as well, particularly in the long run. And this stuff is hidden in the darkness, and there are monsters in the darkness. And, some people live their whole lives and they avoid this darkness. Some people are afraid of the monsters that lurk in the dark. Some people are not afraid of those monsters because they've been through worse. But however, they are susceptible to believing that connecting with the deeper emotions, such as, and this is the point I really want to make, that some people believe that connecting with the deeper emotions, such as sadness, is a weakness. And I assure you, and these other people here can assure you as well, that connecting and processing those deep-seated emotions is the absolute opposite of weakness. It takes a level of strength that only people who have experienced deep trauma and begin to heal can truly understand and appreciate. And it can be scary. So what I want to stress is that, not only through this gateway of vulnerability, it's only through the gateway of vulnerability that we can recognize and honor, process, and most importantly, validate our deepest and darkest fears. And it's only through that process that we can ultimately heal and become free of those things that arrest our personal development and our emotional freedom and ultimately our happiness. And it's through that process that we could finally, become who we were born to be. And as Charity mentioned, connection is a critical piece for this vulnerability. Originally I wasn't going to say this, but Charity made a great point. connection is the critical piece for vulnerability. And that's what events like today's event and all these amazing people here offer. They offer that safe connection, and it's that safe connections. It's the corner piece that we need to be able to feel safe enough to begin to explore vulnerability. And I just want to say that, you know, how truly honored and grateful I am to be here included in this conversation for that reason.
Thank you, Brad. So he also, and I let it go, which, because he's saying a whole lot of good stuff that really I don't have to facilitate. So thank you on that even more. But what I want to do is, though, what I gathered from that is practicing vulnerability equals post-traumatic growth.
Yeah, I believe
And
so.
so what I'm going to pause here and let everybody feel that for a moment, please. So feel the fact that if you, or not even, it may not be a fact for you, I don't know, but feel that statement that vulnerability is equivalent to post-traumatic growth. And some of you may not need to feel it, because I believe each of us actually kind of said it in our own special ways. Okay, great. Now, I'm gonna kind of, I'm staying here with vulnerability, but I want to, and I'm glad that Brad mentioned first responder, because with veterans and first responders, it's kind of like intermingled, mixed together with kind of what we go through as far as experiences, et cetera, et cetera. But the question I have to explore now is, and I think we kind of touched on, especially Chris, when he mentioned courage, but how do we practice vulnerability? And I think Charity did as well, in a military or first responder setting. Or do we even practice vulnerability in that type of setting? And I think Charity kind of, when they were like mentioning being an advisor with some of this stuff that's, you know, is it too hard for these softer soldiers type thing? I think it's kind of what I got out of it, maybe not, but go ahead. I think Chris has his hand up. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I think Bradley touched on it well, that vulnerability, it can be considered our greatest emotional strength, but also like be associated with emotional weakness. And I think it takes education and like I said earlier, courage to look at it as an emotional strength and not as a weakness. You know, when being in the military, they just, you know, rub some dirt on it, you'll be all right, move on, continue the mission. And we got so ingrained with that type of mindset, even, you know, growing up as a young man, like emotions was not something that I was supposed to share, right? So being educated or just again, something Bradley said, that safe space for somebody to be vulnerable and be taught that it's an emotional strength, not a weakness, and that it's something that can be used as a tool for healing.
Go ahead, Charity.
Yeah, I think, you know, in any situation, whether it's in the military or your everyday life, you know, using the example Chris was saying, you know, if you're driving down the road, you're vulnerable in that scenario. If somebody cuts you off, you don't want to just continue be bopping down and not paying any attention. You're going to stop on the brakes. And so that ability to have it always, but also know when you have to like override it a little bit, if that makes sense, in those like emergency type of situations. So yeah, emergency situations are a little different, but not every day is an emergency. And I think that is one of those things that as veterans, first responders, we get stuck in that. We get stuck that every day is an emergency. Every moment is an emergency. And then when we're not in that scenario anymore, it's like, okay, we're still in it. Like our body is still stuck, you know, we need some kind of jolt to like, oh, okay, I don't have to be like that anymore. And while I was in, that was, I guess, kind of my thing, is that whether you had been in the military one day, I'd been in maybe 15 years. Okay, we're both humans, at the end of the day, we're both humans. We need to get the job done. And yes, there was a respect level there, but also a human level. There has to be a human level, in my opinion. Now, that's not everyone's opinion in the military, but I believe that it made it much more helpful to see everyone as humans and everyone's military rank or structure or whatever, versus only seeing the structure part of it. If we miss out on that human piece, we miss out on gaining their trust and having that open door for when they have a trauma and they need to share it. Like, if we're not treating them as humans prior to that and being vulnerable and saying, oh yeah, maybe let me share about something, and giving them that kind of freedom to embrace the courage and step into it, we make that connection. And all of a sudden that could be a catalyst to change that person's life, because we gave them a door that they choose to open or not. And hopefully.
Right. Thank you. So go ahead, Brad.
Yeah, so and Chris and Charity make excellent points, and I wanted to kind of string that together with that, Charity mentioned an emergency and someone slamming on their brakes or something that may happen. And I think to get people to understand that we do, when we've had traumatic experience and we're hyper vigilant, that we perceive almost everything as a threat. So even the slamming on the brakes, in the long run, to really look at it, it really doesn't matter that someone slams on their brakes, but we're going to react. But to go back to Chris's point, when we began doing the work to understand that this is a lifelong process, I did so much work and got to a certain point that I thought I was just ready to help people. And then when I started helping people more, I started realizing how much more work I had to do, which is the beauty of it, right? And so it's a process. I mean, it's a long process. And so over years, we can move through this process and do our work. And then maybe we can get to where when people slam on our brakes, we don't perceive that as a threat. So we're just, and I'm not going to tell you can't make a comment like what an idiot or something like that, but it doesn't create that emotional disaster response like it's a real threat to our life. That's the problem, is, we perceive that as a threat. And getting people to understand and identify that. And I think Chris mentioned the word education, get people to identify that we react as a crisis, even when it is not a crisis, and be able to begin to sort out what is a crisis and what isn't, leads us, to what Charity was talking about.
Thank you, Brad. Thank you. Yeah, thank all of you there. I mean, I can't really add anything to the fact that of what has already been said. So kind of I want to move on to this next one and this is, I'm not saying you're going to agree with what I'm going to say, but it's something I kind of been working with. And as everyone knows, I'm all into sensations. Where do I feel in my body? I know that if I let my thinking mind rest and I try to focus on my sensations, then the hamsters do not want to run in the wheel. Sometimes they break the wheels down even. That doesn't mean that they're not there running. It happens because I can't shut it off. That's what the mind's supposed to do. But I did find one thing, because when we talk about this fear, the sensation of fear with vulnerability, and I've heard the sensation of relief also with vulnerability. And all of us have said this, both. So this is kind of what I have experienced, at least, and I've used my yoga mala, which, as a yoga for change teacher, I would never do this. I would never wear this into a yoga class. Okay, we are trauma informed. All right, but I'm using this as a tool today. So if I keep this in my thinking mind, it's like, oh shit, the executive director's on here, I'm gonna get a warning or da 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 da, and it goes. And then it goes and goes and goes, and then fear comes in, and then paranoia comes in, and da da da, and it snowballs, right? But if I stay with the physical sensations of what this brings me, it brings me exactly joy. So that's what I want to discuss now, which is very much, and I think it's both. I think that vulnerability is both. But I do think that, and I could be wrong, that when I keep it in my thinking mind, vulnerability is more fearful, as opposed to if I keep it in the physical sensations of my body. What does everybody else think?
For me, like, I think, when we think about setting the thinking mind aside, I'm not real good at that. It's something that I'm learning to do, but as I, go through the process of healing from trauma and being aware of how trauma has impacted my life and understanding that I am not a victim. Like, I have the ability to go after and seek change in my life, seek change and healing. And doing so, by being vulnerable, I develop deeper emotional connections and greater intimacy with others. And I think we as humans lack intimacy. And like, I know for me as a man, like, having people that I trust and I feel comfortable talking about the pain that's in my life and knowing that they're only going to try to help me and not hurt me, like, that allows me to feel the relief that you're talking about. Like, I know that through the work that I've done in my life, I've built intimate relationships with other men, in my case, that allows me to be comfortable enough to share something that's on my mind and gain a relief that comes with that.
So it kind of goes, and I'm going to tie this in here with what we've been talking about with connection and everything else. So I don't know how that makes you feel, but I know that it's like, okay, yeah, when I can connect in a healthy way, it does give me that relief. All right, anybody else? Brad, Charity. Go ahead, Brad.
Yeah. So one of the things, I think it's both. It's a fear of vulnerability, that the initial fear, it's scary, right? I mean, it's perceived as weakness. We want to control our emotions. We're afraid of what's lurking behind the door. When we open the door, that everything just may come spilling out. But two of the things that I always say when I teach this is that the best example is everybody's had a good cry, and there isn't anyone that can deny after they've had a good cry that they felt better. And that's vulnerability right there in a nutshell. And it's just tapping into those emotions, feeling those emotions and letting them out. There's a reason we want to cry. Why do we stop it? I don't understand why we're so obsessed with trying not to cry in front of other people. But so the other analogy I use, because I'm a firefighter, so please forgive me, is when when people die in a fire, they typically die of smoke inhalation, and the majority of the time they're found under a bed or they're found in a closet. And the reason that is because they're hiding from the fire, which from where we're sitting now seems ludicrous. The fire doesn't care where you are, the smoke doesn't care where you are, but in that sense of panic, the victims hide from the fire and the smoke finds them and eventually kills them, and that's where they're found. And so we know sitting here that the only way to save yourself, presuming you can't jump out of a window to safety, if the fire's on the stairs and you're upstairs, is you have to run through the fire to get out the front door. And when you do that, you're going to get burned, but you're going to survive and be better off in the long run than you were had you just hidden from the monster lurking in the dark. You just hidden from the fire and the smoke. And that's what I think vulnerability is, just allowing yourself to run through that fire to get to on the other side. And for each of us, it's all going to be different what it's like when we get there. And it may be incremental, it may take a while, but there is that relief that you're talking about. On the other side, but we have to work through the fear to get there.
Pause here. How does it feel? I want you all to feel vulnerability is running to the other side through the fire. Feel that. Now, sorry, Charity, do you have to add to this? I know you do. I think you do.
It's actually gonna follow right into what you said. So then you run through the fire, and maybe it's something that serious, maybe it all feels the same. It can all feel very fearful. So whatever it is, for me this morning, it was getting on here knowing darn well that I was going to cry, because that is me. Like, that is me. And it has to do with I feel this excitement, I cry. If I'm nervous, I cry. If I'm sad, I cry. Like, that's just my energy coming out, you know? And so getting on here and having the breakthrough that I have every time I feel more comfortable doing that without apologizing for it, you know, that fear of doing that. And then on the other side of it, I'm sitting here and I'm like literally like laughing in myself, like, well, that was not that hard. That was pretty funny. Like, all of that fear. And here I am, like, I'm still me. Yep, here we go, you know? And to Bradley's point, like, crying creates this sense of ease often for folks afterward. And so does laughter. And so that idea, and Forrest was laughing at a couple things, and it made me laugh, him laughing, you know, just that whole sense of like the messiness of life and how we fear some things that are so simple. And then on the other side, we look back and go, well, that was nothing. Like, why? That was nothing. And we kind of can giggle or whatever. And there's this beautiful exercise that I was taught through grief yoga. And it's you pretty much put your hands like wherever you feel pain or angst or whatever in your body, and you pull them out, and you're like pulling the pain out of your body. So like the sensation Forrest was talking about, you pull that out of your body and you hold it in front of you. And every time, like 100% of the time, at the beginning of the class, my pain is like here, my hands are tight, it's heavy, it's like dark. And by the end of the class, we're pulling it out, and it's like this ooey gooey whatever. And sometimes the technique that my teacher uses is to literally laugh at it, to literally laugh at this like ooey gooey nastiness in your hand. And suddenly you've felt the pain, you've felt it in your body, you've acknowledged it's there, but suddenly you take away the mental like heaviness of it by laughing at it. So it's just this beautiful thing. And it's all vulnerability. I mean, even that exercise, the first time I taught it to someone, I'm like, oh God, they're gonna think I'm crazy. Like, maybe they're not gonna feel it like I did. And it was powerful for that person. So stepping into something like that is, again, it could be life-changing, life-giving. And I know I feel that.
Thank you, Charity. So I'm gonna like tie in some yoga stuff here with that. One thing I want to say about Charity is that it was effective because she practiced it before she taught it. That's like one of the it's kind of like as soldier or as leaders, we were told, you know, I can't be a good leader unless I'm a good soldier first or a good follower. So that's the first thing. The other thing, you know, how do you practice physical vulnerability in shapes and forms? And like one of my teacher, he would say that in order to receive, I have to be vulnerable. And everybody has really been saying that in an indirect way this whole last 45 minutes. That, and I'll get to you in a minute, Chris. Sorry. So then the challenge is, how do I allow someone to receive something that is very fearful? Because let's face it, especially the populations that yoga change that we teach, these folks, yeah, okay. I mean, I got kids coming in laughing at me, which I'm okay with. I mean, I like being laughed at because I know laughter leads to joy, and if I'm the brunt of your joy, then yeah, let's go. But anyway, that's another rabbit hole when it close. One thing I want to talk about, though. Well, I'll pause that because go ahead, Chris. Did you have something to add? I think.
Yeah, I I was just thinking about Bradley's analogy, and when we talk about, running through the fire, those of us that have discovered this process through vulnerability and putting in the work, like, often end up in the helping fields. Like, I feel a responsibility to share that path and journey with other people that are on the same struggle that I was going through. I think that's important to carry on.
Yeah, I love that, because that reminds me of what I was taught as the number one rule of abundance. And that's, in order to keep my abundance, I must first share it. Which kind of goes in, if I'm not connecting, then how am I able to share? I don't think it's possible. Anyhow, I'm gonna close that rabbit hole of this part. I'm gonna open something else up, and we got about 11 minutes. Because we talked about crying and vulnerability and this, that, and the other. And I know that for me, sometimes when I cry, it's not because of any that icky, ooey, gooey, whatever. And not saying it's not, but it's those uncomfortable sensations, as we call them, I will say. Not so much those, but for me, it's more, I'm experiencing my true self in another perspective. Because for someone who's been through trauma and the amount of trauma that I've been through and whatnot, to ask me to experience who I truly am is overwhelming. And it comes out what my teacher says, to replenish the earth, right? Water replenishes the earth. So that's I don't know so my conclusion with all of that, what I just said, is that vulnerability equals true essential nature. Maybe that's how we end it. We still have 10 minutes. If anybody else has anything to say, I'm okay. I mean, I would love for anybody else to say something else. I know that's kind of powerful. It was for me. Maybe we just sit for a few minutes and feel that vulnerability, yeah, is true essential nature. Feel that. All righty, I do thank everyone for showing up. For my panel participants, do you have anything else? I know some of you said there was a mic dropper, but it just came to me.
Are there any questions from the chat? Like,
There were, yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, how about opening up to questions? I need to think about that one, because I knew this was a dense topic. I didn't expect to get a little finished. So does anybody have any questions for anybody, specific or even in general? And I'll give it a few moments for you to type it in the chat. Or we could just have an awkward moment like we did before we started. I'd have no problem with that too. Rocking that good, guys. Come on.
Can I
Questions?
just say thank you to all the panelists for sharing a part of your soul with us today and being vulnerable in this moment. And I really appreciated hearing you, and I really do want to quote you on that what you said, Brad. So yeah, thank you so much.
I feel the same way, and I'm sure in the coming weeks I'm going to be talking to people about running through the fire a lot, as well as myself.
Wonderful. Thank you both, Michelle and Ann. Thank you for sharing in.
So there's a question here, how to get over fear of driving or using a computer. On to answer that one.
I've never had the fear of either one of those, so I have no experience in that.
Is it going to be cheesy if I just say run through the fire and just do it?
Well, so this kind of does, it reminds me of, so as an officer, I had to, in the Army, I had to go through this, it's called Combined Armed Staff Services School. And prior to that, school, my access to computers was limited. I mean, for fuck's sake, I was a infantry platoon leader. Excuse me for using the F-bomb there, folks. But I'm a platoon leader. Why do I need to use a computer? Oh, by the way, as an officer, you got to have staff abilities, right? And I just went through and did it. I mean, there were many nights I had no sleep. But I mean, as cheesy as it may sound, you just got to get up and get through it. And unfortunately, what that looks like for you, besides just being there to help as a supporter, that's about all I could do, because like Chris said, I really haven't had a fear of driving. I just had a pretty major accident and I'm back driving. So, and computers, I just powered through it. All right, so we got some, someone's had trouble being vulnerable with a sibling.
I wouldn't mind just briefly touching on that.
Yeah, I think actually out of all of us, you're probably one of the best ones to.
Yeah, I work a lot with families, estranged families, and intergenerational trauma. You know, I don't know your circumstances, Jessica. It could be being vulnerable with a toxic family member, so you're trying to protect yourself. It could be that you're struggling with your own vulnerability to reconnect, and you know that you need to do that. You know, I would say the second one, the latter, is you know, be vulnerable and just have a conversation, honest conversation, try to get them, you know, to be understanding. If it's a former, where it's a toxic family member that you're trying to be vulnerable with and reconnect with, my advice would be to protect yourself at all. The first and foremost, which it's the balance with the vulnerability, right? You want to be vulnerable and you want to extend yourself, but we also can't do it in dangerous situations. And with a toxic family member, it can be dangerous. So just make sure that yourself is protected, and make sure that you can afford to be vulnerable and maybe take a loss if that happens with the toxic response is not what you had anticipated. So you can recoil in small increments and process those in smaller increments without putting yourself at risk, if that makes sense.
All righty. All righty, cool. I don't know if anybody else, if Chris or Charity has anything to add to that. What it was, Charity, was someone's having trouble with a sibling, being vulnerable with the sibling. I know that I really don't have a whole lot. I love the question and the feedback, because I'm actually kind of having to do that with a family reunion, since both mom and pops have passed. It's the first time all the siblings have got together, so it's going to be an interesting one. So thank you for both of you, the question and the response. Because you know, everything is about me. Go ahead, Chris.
I think that in any situation, like when we're doing things that are uncomfortable and we're being vulnerable, practice, you know, just like we practice yoga and we practice, you know, being present in our lives today, like everything that we do requires practice. If we think we're going to get it perfect on the first shot, you know, we're just not. Like that's how we fail. We fail, we learn, we fail, we learn, and eventually succeed. And like I had a similar situation. I have a brother that's in prison for life, and I struggled with the relationship, and like I had to talk to somebody else like I was talking to my brother and get the fear and anger out of the way so that I could represent myself without that being present.
Thank you, Chris. And that ties in. I wanted to tie in a comment here from Shanta that said that she had a fear of driving because of an accident, and she had to drive that route which she was on, that she was an accident on, and it goes through. It's still that resounding, like, gotta jump through the fire, or you gotta go through it. Whether you call it a fire or a muck or whatever,
Right.
and just know that as I keep going, I'm going to find my true essential nature on the other side, waiting for me. Hey, here I am.
I think that in that situation with the computer, like we practice, we go to a class and learn something, go to a safe environment to learn about the thing that you fear so that you can overcome it, right? Like if I'm afraid of using a computer, it's because I don't trust myself or my capabilities. So increase my capabilities so that I can overcome something like that. And you do it in a safe way.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said that. It reminded me, Chris, that you know, libraries have those. Sometimes I think libraries are doing online classes even for things like that. Because I know libraries are always safe, or they try to be at least. All right, anybody else? All right, once again, I just want to say thank you to everyone who participated. You guys all rock. All of you that showed up, you guys rock as well. One thing I do want to say, we do offer a class for the military family members on Mondays at 5:30. You can go to y4c.org and find the events that it's on there, if that's something that you want to do. Also, we are a nonprofit. So that being said, I'm going to ask you, if you are able to donate, please do. Not a requirement. You can go through y4c.org also to do that. And with that being said, the awesomeness within me sees and honors the awesomeness within each and every one of you. Namaste.